NBC's Aaron Gilchrist reporting from Kerrville, Texas. Aaron, thank you for your reporting. We appreciate it. Joe?
You know, Willie, the flood system, as you reported, was considered antiquated a decade ago. You had not only the people of Kerrville, you had to have people in the county and people in the state repeatedly ignore these very clear signals that people's lives were in danger. Texans' lives were in danger because they weren't upgrading an antiquated system. We heard a sheriff say in a clip that things could have been so much worse, and certainly they could have, and we salute the first responders. But also, there is no doubt, if the warnings over the past decade had been listened to by politicians in Texas on the local and the state level, then this tragedy could have been so less worse, so less tragic. And I'm reminded of Hurricane Katrina, how for a decade you had city officials in New Orleans, you had state officials in Louisiana ignore warning after warning after warning about an old, antiquated levee system that was not able to hold back the floodwaters. So it seems to me, Willie, that's the same thing that's happening here. They knew there was a problem, and there's really no passing of the buck, because I'll tell you how things happen. When I represented 6 counties in Northwest Florida, if there was a problem that people had in, a hurricane coming, then, and somebody saw a problem, somebody would talk to a county commissioner. County commissioner would talk to me. I would get funding for whatever needed to be taken care of, and it would be taken care of. I find it hard to believe 2 things right here. One, again, complaints about an antiquated warning system went unheeded for a decade. That's number one. Number 2, that the local authorities, that the county authorities, that the state authorities allowed a children's camp to be built in a flood zone just a few years ago, in a highly dangerous flood zone. You, of course, talking about the reporting that's on the front page of the New York Times today, Willie. So that's again, one more thing where the state of Texas failed miserably. I find it hard to believe that would happen in the state of Florida. Post Andrew, leaders took every precaution to make sure that building standards were raised. But again, how they knew this was a problem for a decade and still allowed Camp Mystic to expand in an active flood zone is beyond me.
Yeah, to expand or at least not have a new updated warning system as they expanded as part of getting the permit or part of that expansion. There are camps nearby in this same flood zone, Joe, and New York Times has some great reporting on this morning, where just by word of mouth, there was a nearby camp where a staffer was up at 1 o'clock in the morning and heard the alert on his phone, and he started waking people up and telling them, move them to higher ground, and everyone in that camp survived. The point is, though, you shouldn't be relying on somebody happening to be awake at 1 o'clock in the morning and seeing something on his phone to run around to cabins and get everybody to higher ground. That's what happened, and so tragically and so devastatingly did not happen at Camp Mystic. There's got to be a better way. Joe, oddly, the other day, Governor Abbott of Texas, very defensive and bristling at reporters, saying this is the talk of losers to ask these kind of questions in a moment like this while we're still looking for children. No, it's the talk of accountability and making sure this never happens again, and asking questions about how this was possible, how we got here, and preventing, again, this from ever happening again to a group of little girls fighting for their lives in the middle of the night during a flood.
Yeah, I mean, the talk of losers is somebody is somebody who doesn't take responsibility. When something happened in his state where people died. There's an antiquated system in an active flood zone that everybody knows is a dangerous flood zone. And in his state, nothing is done for over a decade to an antiquated warning system. And his state allows the building, the expansion of a camp in a flood zone instead of saying, sorry, you can't build in an extraordinarily dangerous flood zone. You're going to have to actually move to higher ground. Right. That's what responsible states do. That's what responsible leaders do. And the governor, suggesting that any calls for accountability is a talk of losers, actually suggests that the losers talk is that person who's afraid to face the accountability he deserves.
Makes me feel like asking more questions.
Well, there will be more questions asked, and it doesn't matter. Like if losers don't want to face accountability, too bad. They're going to face accountability. Let's bring in right now the co-host of our fourth hour, contributing writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, also U.S. special correspondent for BBC News and host of The Rest of Politics, Caddy K. Jonathan Lemire, the president's going to be heading down to Texas today. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the president actually believes it's tomorrow. Yeah, President Trump heads to Texas tomorrow. Look, as any White House has to do, you have to respond to outside events. You have to respond to these tragedies, these natural disasters. We saw President Trump do so in his first term. This one of the first times in his second where he's had to make these solemn trips. Trip delayed a few days because, of course, anytime a president travels to a site like this, it takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of law enforcement personnel to help secure the area. The White House didn't want to pull those people from their duties with the rescue and recovery efforts. So that's why the trip is not happening until tomorrow. He's expected to tour some of the site, thank local officials for their hard work, and no doubt, Joe and Mika, face some tough questions about some of the federal funding cuts that he's proposed, his plan to disband FEMA. Now, they've backed off that a little this week. The president says that's not going to impact the response to this particular tragedy in Texas, but there will be others. That is, especially in an age of climate change, there will be more floods, there will be more storms, there will be more fires and the like. So he is going to face some scrutiny. He has been also very defensive of the state and local response there in Texas to this point. He's backed the governor. He's backed local officials there. But he will undoubtedly face some tough questions and could face a few uncomfortable moments there as he does also play the role of consoler in chief, not one he always wears, a role he wears most gracefully, but he'll be there to meet with the families and friends of those lost as well.
Well, it's good he's going.
Yeah, it really is. And you know, when there's a tragedy like this, Americans want to see the president of the United States, whether that president's a Republican or a Democrat, on the ground. So it's good that he's going to be going tomorrow. Also, as he said before, if he'd gone too early, he would have been getting in the way. It's still a very, very